Paige, 27 years old, felt that morning as if someone had quietly removed the floor beneath her feet. She stood in her parents' living room, suitcase still closed, while Harold pointed toward the door as if she were a stranger standing on his porch. Valerie folded her arms and said, "You either follow our rules under this roof or you leave today." The words landed like cold stones. Paige did not scream or beg. She simply looked at both of them and asked, "So my choices are obedience or exile?" Neither parent blinked. Harold said, "That's how families stay in order." Something inside her shifted, not loudly, not angrily, just a quiet understanding that this was no longer discipline but dismissal. She straightened her shoulders, letting the silence answer for her. Paige had spent years trying to keep peace in that house, giving more emotional support than she ever received in return. She had covered grocery bills when money was tight, paying more than $200 at a time without mentioning it. She had helped her mother handle church events, her father manage overdue paperwork, and her younger cousins with school projects. But none of that mattered in that moment. Valerie stepped forward and said, "You've been getting too independent lately. It's changing how you talk to us." Paige replied softly, "I only asked to be spoken to with respect." Harold shook his head, not angry, just firm. "Respect is earned." The sentence stung because she had spent her whole life trying to earn something they had freely given others. She realized she never would. She walked to her room without another word, her heart steady but heavy. Her suitcase lay open on the bed, where she had packed small things earlier for a weekend shift, never imagining she would actually be leaving home today. Valerie followed her to the doorway and said, "You are making this bigger than it needs to be." Paige folded a sweater slowly and answered, "I'm only accepting what you told me." Her voice stayed calm, almost gentle. Valerie looked unsettled, as if she expected shouting and tears. But Paige refused to perform pain for anyone. Silence wrapped around her like armor. She zipped the suitcase, lifted it with both hands, and felt a strange mix of fear and freedom. This was not rebellion. It was survival. Carrying the suitcase through the hallway felt like walking through a museum of memories she no longer trusted. Photos of her birthdays, school awards, and church outings lined the walls. Moments they used to brag about publicly, even though privately they reminded her she was too soft, too emotional, and too opinionated. Harold opened the front door and said, "Let us know when you're ready to come home." Paige looked at him steadily. "Home is supposed to be a place where I am safe, not controlled." He shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The air felt thick, like the moment before a storm. She stepped outside, not slamming the door, not raising her voice. Just leaving. And that quiet exit hit harder than any argument ever could. Paige placed her suitcase in the trunk of her old silver car, the one she bought with money she saved from working 2 jobs, earning a steady income she never flaunted. As she slid into the driver's seat, her phone buzzed. A message from her mother read, "We hope this teaches you something." She stared at it for a moment, then turned the phone face down. She whispered to herself, "It already has." When she pulled out of the driveway, she felt the weight of the years she had spent trying to protect her parents' reputation, cleaning up their mistakes, smoothing over tense family moments, defending them even when they were wrong. They had no idea how much they had relied on her. They were about to learn. Paige drove to a small motel on the edge of town, a place she had only seen from the highway, with a faded blue sign and a front desk clerk who barely looked up. She paid for one night with $40 in cash, wanting no digital trail that her parents could question later. Inside the room, the air smelled like cleaning spray and old carpets, but it felt more peaceful than her childhood bedroom ever had. She placed her suitcase on the chair and sat on the bed, breathing slowly. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Valerie. "If you think running away makes you right, it doesn't." Paige typed nothing back. Instead she whispered, "I'm not running. I'm choosing myself." She lay back on the pillow, realizing this was the first decision she had made without fear of someone else's approval. As the hours passed, Paige replayed the morning in her mind. She kept hearing Harold's line, "Respect is earned," echoing like a judgment passed before the trial. She remembered all the times she had cooked dinner when her parents worked late, paying for small repairs around the house, covering fees for church events when her father insisted they look generous. She had quietly spent more than $300 many times, never asking for refunds, never reminding them of her contributions. When her cousin Jenna struggled with rent, Paige had stepped in with $200 in full words to keep her from being evicted, but her parents took the credit for family unity. Now she saw the pattern clearly. Her silence had been used as a resource. And the moment she asked for an equal voice, they called it disrespect. The next morning, Paige drove to her job at a small community center where she worked as a youth mentor. Her coworker Linda noticed the overnight bag and asked, "Rough weekend?" Paige hesitated, then answered softly, "Rougher than usual." Linda placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to explain anything until you're ready." The kindness almost made Paige tear up, but she held herself steady. She spent the day leading group sessions helping teenagers talk about boundaries and self-worth, lessons she had never been allowed to practice at home. During lunch she checked her phone. Her father had sent a new message. "We expect you to come back and apologize before things get worse." Paige stared at the words. Worse? That meant they were preparing something. The fear didn't overwhelm her. It sharpened her awareness. That evening, Paige visited her Aunt Marie, the one person in the family who never treated her like a child needing supervision. When she arrived, Marie opened the door and said, "Your face tells me everything. Come in." Paige explained the ultimatum word for word. Marie listened quietly, then sighed deeply. "They've forgotten how much they rely on you," she said. "And they don't want the family to see you stepping out of their control." Paige frowned. "Control? I just wanted respect." Marie nodded. "That's the one thing they don't know how to give without conditions." She made tea and added, "Be careful. When people lose control of someone they depend on, they often make choices out of fear, not love." Those words settled heavily in Paige's chest. As Paige prepared to leave, Marie said, "Before you go, there's something you should see." She handed Paige an envelope pulled from a drawer. Inside was a stack of documents with Paige's name printed on top. "Your parents didn't mean for you to find out," Marie whispered. Paige scanned the pages. Credit applications, loan statements, unpaid medical bills, all using her name. Some were small amounts like $50, others were larger like $400. Paige's breath tightened. "They opened accounts under my name?" Marie nodded. "They told the family you agreed to help them get approved." Paige felt the room tilt, not in anger but in awareness. This was the deeper betrayal. Not just control, misuse. She folded the papers carefully. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. "This changes everything." Paige sat in her car outside Aunt Marie's house with the envelope in her lap, the weight of it pressing against her like a new truth she couldn't unsee. She whispered, "So this is what they meant by things getting worse." She had always believed her parents were strict, demanding, sometimes unfair, but never dishonest. She opened the documents again, scanning the dates. Some accounts were months old. Others were more recent, including one opened just last week. It struck her that the ultimatum might not have been about control alone, but fear that she might discover what they had done. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Harold read, "We need to talk tonight." She closed the screen gently. Talk meant convince. Convince meant control. And she was finally outside that shadow. Instead of driving to the motel, Paige went to a quiet park overlooking the river. She sat on a bench and laid the documents beside her, letting the wind move the corners. She thought about every time her parents had warned her not to question their decisions, their tone, their expectations. She replayed the phrase Valerie used often, "We do what's best for you even when you don't understand." But these papers were not protection. These were choices made behind her back, using her credit, her identity, her trust. As the sun began to set, she murmured, "They didn't push me out. They were already digging beneath my feet." She folded the documents and placed them back in the envelope, feeling a calm resolve forming where fear once lived. She wasn't planning revenge. She was planning clarity. On her way back to the motel, Paige stopped for dinner at a small diner. The waitress, a warm woman named Carla, noticed how quietly she sat and asked, "Everything all right, sweetheart?" Paige managed a soft smile. "Just a long day." Carla nodded, leaving her space but checking in with gentle glances. It reminded Paige how different kindness felt when it had no strings attached. Her parents' words echoed again, "Respect is earned." Yet they had built entire expectations on her loyalty, not theirs. Halfway through her meal, another message arrived from Valerie. "Your father is furious. Come home and fix this before the family finds out." Paige set the phone face down. That line confirmed everything. This was about image, not love. And for the first time she allowed herself to stop protecting their image. Later that night, Paige spread the documents across the motel bed, organizing them into neat rows. She looked at each signature, her name written in a handwriting that wasn't hers. Her chest ached, but her mind stayed clear. She whispered, "This didn't happen in one day. They planned this." She found an application where Harold had listed himself as her financial co-signer without her consent. Another showed Valerie claiming Paige lived at home for household approval, even though Paige had been paying for her own apartment for 2 years. A quiet truth sank in. They had depended on her more than she ever depended on them. And if she had stayed, she would never have known. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She simply gathered all the papers together and said, "Tomorrow I take my life back." The next morning, Paige went to the bank to request copies of any accounts linked to her name. The service officer, a kind man named Daniel, pulled up her file and paused. "Ma'am, did you authorize these?" Paige kept her voice steady. "No, I didn't." Daniel nodded slowly, printing the documents. "Some of these accounts are overdue. One is marked for escalation." Paige thanked him, collected everything in a folder and walked back to her car. She didn't feel panic. She felt clarity. As she sat in the driver's seat, her phone rang, her mother's name glowing on the screen. She let it ring out. Then a text appeared, "We need to solve this privately. Do not involve anyone else." Paige stared at the words. The fear was theirs, not hers anymore. And that shift changed everything. Paige drove to her workplace early that morning, parking in the far corner of the lot just to gather her breath. The folder of documents sat beside her like a silent witness. When she stepped into the youth center, Linda noticed the tension in her shoulders and asked, "Are you sure you're okay to be here today?" Paige nodded. "Being here helps me stay clear." Throughout the day she moved through her tasks with calm precision, helping kids with homework, checking on group activities, and guiding a workshop about healthy boundaries, a topic that hit closer than anyone knew. During lunch she received another message from Harold. "You're embarrassing this family. Come home now." Paige exhaled slowly. Embarrassing? She had kept their secrets for years, defended them when they were wrong, supported them without recognition. Now silence was no longer serving them. It was serving her. That evening Paige visited her aunt again, carrying the folder. Marie greeted her with a worried expression. "Did they contact you?" Paige nodded. "They want everything handled privately." Marie rubbed her temples. "Of course they do. Private means controlled." Paige laid the documents on the table. "I just need someone else to see this, to confirm I'm not imagining it." Marie reviewed each paper carefully, her face tightening. "They used your name, your credit, your identity, and then gave you an ultimatum to distract you." Paige swallowed hard. "I kept thinking I was the problem." Marie shook her head firmly. "You were the shield. Now that you stepped aside, the truth is showing." Paige felt something inside her settle. She didn't need revenge. The truth didn't need her to push. It only needed her to stop protecting it. Word started spreading quietly among extended relatives. First through cousins, then an uncle who called Paige unexpectedly. "I heard you left home," he said. "Is everything all right?" Paige hesitated, then answered, "I'm figuring things out." He cleared his throat. "Your parents said you're being dramatic." Paige replied gently, "I'm not arguing with them anymore." The uncle paused. "That doesn't sound dramatic at all." For the first time, someone outside her immediate circle voiced doubt about her parents' version. She felt a strange relief, not because she wanted to expose them but because she no longer felt invisible. Later that night her cousin Jenna texted, "If you ever need a place to stay, I got you." Paige smiled faintly. Her parents had always insisted the family saw her as childish. But the family was proving them wrong without her saying a word. Meanwhile, Harold and Valerie began calling more frequently, leaving voicemail after voicemail. Some were stern, "Come home, Paige. This rebellion ends now." Some were guilt-laden, "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" And others tried sympathy, "We're your parents. We just want what's best." But none contained accountability. None acknowledged the ultimatum, the misuse of her name, or the fear they had of her discovering the truth. Paige listened to each message only once, then deleted it. She wasn't cold. She wasn't punishing them. She was simply refusing to step back into the cycle. By withdrawing her emotional labor, her silence, defense, and protection, she created a vacuum they didn't know how to fill. Their control was slipping not because she fought but because she stopped participating. On Friday afternoon, Paige received a call from the bank. The same officer, Daniel, spoke carefully. "Miss Paige, one of the accounts under your name is being reviewed for identity verification. We may need you to come in again." She thanked him and agreed to stop by after work. When she hung up, her phone rang again. This time it was Valerie. She didn't answer. A text followed immediately. "Whatever you told the bank, undo it. You're making us look irresponsible." Paige stared at the message for a long moment. That was the truth finally leaking through, not concern for her but fear of exposure. She replied with one calm sentence, "I didn't tell them anything except the truth." Then she turned her phone off, placed it in her bag and walked back to her desk. Silence had never felt so powerful. After work, Paige returned to the bank with the folder tucked under her arm. Daniel greeted her with a careful nod. "Thank you for coming back, Miss Paige. We just need to verify a few signatures." He pulled up several documents on his computer and pointed to an electronic signature that clearly wasn't hers. "Is this your writing?" Paige studied it. "No. I would never sign anything like that." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Then we'll need to escalate this as potential identity misuse." The word misuse echoed in her chest. Not fraud. Not crime. Misuse. Intentional, familiar, personal. As she walked out of the bank, the world felt heavier but clearer. Her parents hadn't just overstepped. They had crossed into a place where love became entitlement. And the moment she stepped away, the consequences had begun to surface on their own. When Paige got back to her car, she found 6 missed calls from Harold. Then a short, sharp message followed. "Do not involve outsiders. You're destroying this family." She didn't respond. Instead, she started the engine and drove to the riverside park where she could think. She sat on a bench, watching the water move slowly past, each current reminding her how steady strength looked. She whispered, "I'm not destroying anything. I'm just not hiding it anymore." A group of teenagers from the center walked by and waved. One of them called, "Miss Paige. See you Monday." Their innocent joy grounded her. She wasn't broken. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't the child they tried to paint her as. She was simply a woman choosing truth over fear, and for the first time the choice felt like oxygen. That night, Paige returned to the motel and found a handwritten note slipped under her door. It read, "Come home so we can fix this before anyone else finds out." But the handwriting wasn't familiar. It wasn't her mother's or father's. It belonged to her younger cousin Michael. Paige immediately called him. When he answered, he whispered, "I didn't want to send it. They made me." Paige closed her eyes. "Were they with you?" Michael hesitated. "They're scared, Paige. They said if the bank investigates, the family will think they're irresponsible." Paige's voice softened. "They're more worried about reputation than repair." Michael sighed. "I just thought you should know." Paige thanked him gently and hung up. It was the first undeniable sign. Her parents were no longer controlling her. They were scrambling. And scrambling makes truth louder. The next morning at the youth center, Linda noticed the exhaustion behind Paige's calm expression. "You're carrying something heavy," she said quietly. Paige nodded. "But I'm learning to carry it differently." Linda smiled softly. "That's what growth looks like." Hours later, while Paige helped a student with a college application, her phone vibrated nonstop. She finally checked it during her break. Extended relatives had begun reaching out. Some confused, some concerned, some curious. A message from an aunt read, "Your parents are saying you're lying about something. What's going on?" Paige didn't reply yet. She remembered Marie's words. When you stop shielding people, their behavior reveals itself. Now she was watching that truth unfold. Her parents had held the narrative for years. But without her silence supporting it, their version was already starting to tear at the edges. That evening, Paige received a call she didn't expect. Pastor Williams from her family's church. His warm voice carried a hint of discomfort. "Paige, your parents asked me to speak with you. They're worried and said you've been misunderstood." Paige listened quietly. "I appreciate your concern, Pastor, but I'm all right." He hesitated. "They mentioned financial issues." They said you agreed to help them but changed your mind. Paige exhaled slowly. Pastor, I didn't change my mind. I was never asked. There was a long pause. Then he said gently, I see. For the first time, someone who had always sided with her parents sounded unsure. If you ever need guidance or clarity, my door is open, he added. When the call ended, Paige felt the shift. The story was no longer theirs alone. Truth was finding its witnesses. That night, Paige sat at the small wooden desk in her motel room, spreading the documents in front of her again. She didn't feel anger, only clarity. She whispered, if they wanted privacy, they should have protected it themselves. As she organized the pages, she noticed patterns she hadn't seen before. Repeated signatures, same approval dates, identical handwriting across different applications. This wasn't a mistake. It was a system. A habit. A reliance on her name because there's no longer qualified. Paige rested her elbows on the desk and pressed her fingers to her temples. The truth wasn't loud. It didn't scream. It simply sat there, undeniable. She closed the folder softly. The next steps weren't revenge. They were responsibility. To herself, her future, and the life she was finally choosing without their permission. The following morning, Paige walked into the community center with a different kind of quiet in her spirit. Strong, steady, unbothered. Linda noticed immediately. You look lighter, she said with a warm smile. Paige nodded. I think I'm ready to stop allowing fear to make decisions for me. During a group session, one of the teens asked, Miss Paige, how do you know when it's okay to walk away from people you love? The room fell silent. Paige met the student's eyes and answered softly, when loving them means losing yourself. The teens nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of it. Paige felt the truth land inside her too. Her parents believed distance would break her. But instead it was rebuilding her. After work, she found another voicemail, Harold's voice, tense and cracking. You're making a mistake you can't undo. But Paige finally knew the opposite was true. Later that evening, Paige drove to Aunt Marie's house again. Marie opened the door with relief. You look different, she said. Paige smiled softly. I feel different. They sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea as Marie asked, Have you decided what to do next? Paige nodded slowly. I'm not confronting them. Not fighting. Not explaining. I'm just stepping out of the shadow. Marie reached over and squeezed her hand. That's strength, Paige. Not everyone understands quiet strength. It scares people who rely on control. Paige looked at the folder. The bank will sort out the accounts. That part isn't mine to fix. Marie nodded. And the family? Paige shrugged gently. They will learn the truth on their own. I don't need to broadcast anything. Silence will guide them just fine. As Paige left Marie's house, she saw her father's car pull up at the end of the street. Harold stepped out and called, Paige. We need to talk. His voice was strained, desperate, not authoritative. Paige stood still, calm. I'm not having a conversation that repeats old patterns, she said. Harold took a step closer. You've involved the bank. Do you know what you've done? Paige answered quietly, I told the truth. He rubbed his forehead. This could ruin us. The sentence revealed everything. Fear not of morality but of consequences. Paige's voice remained steady. Your choices created this. Not mine. For the first time, Harold had no response. His authority didn't work here. His intimidation didn't reach her. She walked past him to her car. She didn't speed away or slam the door. She simply left him standing in his own silence. The next day, extended relatives began calling her, not with accusations but with questions. Your parents said there was a misunderstanding, one cousin said. Another asked, why would they use your name without telling you? The shift was happening. Paige didn't offer details. She didn't expose. She didn't blame. She simply said, I'm choosing healthier boundaries. And somehow that was enough. Even in her silence, people understood something significant had happened. Meanwhile, her parents continued sending frantic messages, pleading, demanding, bargaining, but never apologizing. Never acknowledging the ultimatum. Never admitting the misuse. Their story was unraveling without Paige lifting a finger. As she left work that afternoon, she stepped outside into warm sunlight and felt the air on her face. For the first time in her life, the world didn't feel heavy. It felt open. That evening, Paige received an unexpected call from her workplace director, Ms. Carter. Her voice was gentle but concerned. "Paige, your parents called the center today." Paige stiffened. "What did they say?" Ms. Carter sighed. "They claimed you were under emotional distress and asked if we could limit your work hours until things settle." Paige closed her eyes. "I'm not distressed, Ms. Carter. I'm just establishing boundaries." Ms. Carter replied warmly, "I figured as much. You've been steady and responsible as always. I told them we don't interfere in personal family matters." Paige exhaled with relief. Her parents weren't just trying to pull her back, they were trying to shape the narrative. But for the first time it wasn't landing. People saw her. People believed her. And their attempts to control the story only highlighted how little control they actually had. The next day, Paige returned to the bank to complete the identity verification process. As she waited, a woman from accounting approached her quietly. "Are you Miss Paige?" she asked. Paige nodded. The woman leaned closer. "Your parents came in this morning. They tried to close one of the accounts under your name." Paige felt a cold stillness settle in her chest. "Were they allowed to?" The woman shook her head. "No. We needed your consent." It raised more questions. Paige thanked her softly. The truth was now surfacing faster than her parents could manage. Their fear-driven decisions were leaving footprints everywhere. When Paige walked out of the building, she didn't feel shaken. She felt steady. Her silence had never been passive. It had been preparation. And now it was becoming protection. That evening at the motel, Paige turned on her phone to find dozens of messages from relatives. Some asked gently what was happening. Others said, "Your parents are acting strange," or, "They won't explain anything clearly." It became obvious. The truth was spreading because her parents kept trying to cover it. Paige typed one simple message to a group of close relatives. "I'm safe. I'm working. I'm setting boundaries. I'm not sharing details." Within minutes, replies came, supportive, warm, understanding. Paige realized something she had never considered before. Family loyalty didn't belong exclusively to the loudest voices. It belonged to the ones who showed consistency. And without her parents' narrative controlling the room, her quiet consistency was finally being seen for what it had always been: strength, not rebellion. On Sunday morning, Paige attended church, choosing a different location instead of her family's usual congregation. She wanted peace, not spectacle. After service, Pastor Williams from her parents' church approached her in the parking lot. "Paige," he said softly, "your parents told the congregation you left home because you were overwhelmed." Paige raised her eyebrows. "Overwhelmed by what?" He hesitated. "They didn't say. But people are starting to question their version. It doesn't align with how they know you." Paige nodded quietly. "I'm not fighting them, Pastor. I'm just telling the truth when asked." He studied her for a moment, then smiled kindly. Sometimes dignity is louder than accusation. As he walked away, Paige felt something settle inside her. The awareness that she didn't need to explain her story. Her character was speaking for her. Later that afternoon, Paige received a long message from Valerie. It began with guilt, "You're tearing this family apart," then shifted to panic, "People are asking questions we can't answer," and finally to a plea, "Please come home before everything falls apart." Paige read it slowly, absorbing the pattern. Not once did the message mention the ultimatum. Not once did it acknowledge the accounts misused under her name. Not once did it apologize. She typed a calm response. "I'm choosing space and honesty. I won't hide things that were not my actions." Minutes later, Harold replied with a single line. "If you walk down this path, don't expect us to stand with you." Paige placed the phone down gently. She wasn't asking them to stand with her. She was finally learning to stand alone, and she no longer feared it. The next morning, Paige woke with a clarity she hadn't known in years. She packed her things from the motel, checked out, and drove to view a small apartment she had bookmarked days earlier. The landlord, a friendly woman named Mrs. Green, showed her around the bright one-bedroom space with sunlight streaming through tall windows. It wasn't large, but it felt like freedom. "When could you move in?" Mrs. Green asked. Paige smiled softly. "Today if possible." She paid the deposit using her own savings. Money she had always managed responsibly. As she stood in the empty apartment, she whispered, "This is mine. No ultimatum. No conditions. No voices demanding obedience. Only a room filled with possibility. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt steady, grounded, and prepared for whatever truth would surface next. Later that afternoon, Paige met with a legal advisor at the community center. Someone who offered free consultations for identity concerns. She showed the folder, each document laid out carefully. The advisor reviewed everything and said, "You didn't imagine any of this. These signatures are inconsistent. You have every right to dispute these accounts." Paige nodded slowly. "I'm not trying to punish them." The advisor smiled softly. "You're simply protecting yourself." That sentence lifted a weight she didn't realize she had been carrying. Protecting herself wasn't betrayal. It was boundary. As she gathered the papers, the advisor added, "Families make mistakes. But accountability is still necessary." Paige left the room with a sense of peace. Whatever came next would not be chaos. It would be clarity, documented and undeniable. That evening, Paige received another message from her mother, but this time it was different. Short, quiet. "We didn't mean for things to go this far." Paige read it twice. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest they had come to acknowledging anything. She replied calmly, "I need honesty before relationship. That's my boundary." Hours passed with no response. Instead, a cousin messaged her, "Your parents seem shaken. They're not explaining what happened, but people are noticing something is wrong." Paige didn't feel satisfaction. She felt something simpler, release. She wasn't the one exposing anything. Their own choices were doing the work. For the first time, the pressure she had carried for years, protecting, smoothing, repairing, was not hers to lift. That burden was finally returning to its rightful owners. Days later, Paige settled into her new apartment. She bought inexpensive furniture, paid in full words, and filled the space with soft colors and warm light. She invited Marie to see it, and her aunt hugged her tightly. "I'm proud of you," she said. Paige smiled. "I'm proud of me too." As they talked, Marie mentioned gently, "Your parents have been calling around saying they want to clear the air." Paige nodded. "When they're ready to tell the truth, they know where to find me." She wasn't closing the door forever. She was simply refusing to walk through it blindly. That distinction mattered. It was growth, not punishment. As Marie left, Paige stood in her quiet living room, feeling a kind of peace she had never experienced. Peace built on self-respect, not silence. 1 week later, Paige received a letter. Not a text, not a voicemail, handwritten by both Harold and Valerie. It read, "We made choices out of fear. We should have talked to you. We want to rebuild this, but we understand if you need time." Paige held the letter for a long moment. It wasn't full accountability, but it was a beginning. A shift from control to recognition. She placed the letter on her new table and whispered, "This time rebuilding will be on my terms." She didn't rush to forgive. She didn't rush to return. She simply honored her boundary and her growth. And that was the real victory. Not humiliation. Not revenge. Not exposure. Just a woman choosing dignity, truth, and the life she finally knew she deserved.